My name is Tish Pombadesi. I am with CDFW. I'm a marketing specialist, and I also work with a team that is all about recruiting, reactivating, and retaining. Recruit, retain, reactivate team is what we call ourselves, the R3 team. And we are a part of a group that works to just bring more Californians to hunting, fishing, foraging, and shooting sports, and really just getting outdoors and appreciating our resources that we have here in our wonderful state. Our Harvest Huddle Hours, Harvest Huddle Hour H3s, are a virtual program that we put together to really help us connect with people all across the state and offer resources to really help build confidence and get you, our huddlers, more comfortable with the sports that you're most interested in. Speaking of what you're most interested in, our chat is really blowing up now. More people looking about surf fishing. So Travis, we're gonna have to add that in during our Q&A. Rock fishing from jetties, pier fishing in the Semi Valley. Thank you guys so much for being here. Again, I'm excited to hear about all of it. Today's huddle is on ocean fishing, looking at the basics for piers, jetties, and crab fishing opportunities in California. We have a very knowledgeable panelist today. And before I introduce him, I want to remind everyone that all of our Recruit, Retain, Reactivate, Harvest Huddle Hours, R3H3s, are recorded, including this one. So if you hear something that you like and you might want to share it with someone, this episode will be available on our department's R3 page in about a week. Give us a little bit of time to get it edited and recorded and uploaded. The webpage is wildlife.ca.gov/R3. Again, I'll add that to the chat for you. Scroll down to the Wild California Kitchen tab, and there you'll see a link for all of the past Harvest Huddle Hours, and you can see all of them. We've had close to 20, and they're just a great resource for you. Before we get started, some real quick housekeeping. If you're new to the Zoom webinar platform, you can change the way your screen looks by just clicking the top right icons. There are two views, gallery and presenter. Feel free to just mess around with that. However you make your screen look isn't going to affect anyone else. So just make your screen look however is going to make you happy and get you through the next hour. At the end of the session, there will be an opportunity for audience participation. We're actually counting on it. So use the Q&A feature for that. That Q&A feature is located at the bottom of your screen. It's the icon that looks like two little text bubbles. So just click on that, open the dialog box, and then you can type your questions, hit submit, and I'll get through as many questions as we can. So please ask away. But if for some reason your question doesn't get asked, just know I might be saving it for after the presentation to ask Travis live, or if it's a little bit outside of the scope of today's presentation, feel free to just email us at that email address I popped in, which is R3 statewide program, all one word, at wildlife.ca.gov, and we'll get you the information that you need. Now for our presenter. He's huddled with us before, and he was actually one of our most watched episodes. We're very excited to have him and his expertise back. His name is Travis Tanaka. He has been with CDFW for more than 20 years. During this time, he's worked with ocean salmon, market squid, sardines, hagfish, and California halibut. As I mentioned, he did a halibut talk with us a few months back. He is an avid hunter and recreational fisherman, and he's actually my go-to person for anything marine that I need answered throughout the department. Travis, thank you so much for being here today. We're happy and lucky to have you back. Please take it away. We got a lot of exciting people. Our chat is still blowing up. Fishing from a kayak, crabbing from a kayak. We'll have to throw that in. Pier fishing. People excited to have you here, Travis.
Well, thank you, Tish, for that intro. As Tish said, I'm a longtime department employee, avid hunter, fisherman. In fact, this is coming into my most favorite time of year. People go, what's your favorite season? I go, well, crab, duck, deer, which is all coming right now. Tish, you may want to put maybe a link to our halibut shore fishing huddle that we did a few months back to answer a few questions for those that are here for surf fishing.
Perfect. I'll do that right now.
Good idea. Some of you might have seen that huddle that we did, like she said, maybe a couple months back on halibut and surf fishing. So she's going to go ahead and cue that up. So for today's talk, I'm going to talk about fishing from piers and jetties. And then the second half of the talk is going to be crab fishing basics, either from a boat, piers, jetties, or a floating device such as a kayak, what you're going to need there, and a few rules of the road, that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and just get started. There we go. All right. So right off, what is a pier, jetty, breakwater? Why should you try pier and jetty fishing? Piers and jetties can be quite long in different shapes. So where do you stand? What kind of gear do you need? Rigging? What could you possibly catch? And then we'll review a few regulations at the end. So a pier is not just one of those things, I know it when I see it. So there are some requirements. So a pier must be publicly owned and man-made structure. It's connected to the main coastline or to a natural island above the mean high tide. This is the key. It has unrestricted free access to the general public. It was built or currently functions to allow angling access to ocean waters. Now, jetties and breakwaters, they're publicly owned as well. They have to be connected to land as described in the previous slide. Does offer unrestricted access to the general public. Now, this is an important one to define breakwaters and jetties, is that the purpose is to form the most seaward protective boundary of an ocean harbor. Now, if the above three bullets are applied to where you want to go, then that jetty or breakwater is considered a pier. And we'll talk about why that's important in a little bit. So why try piers and jetties? It's a great way to get the whole family to get out and enjoy the outdoors. There's a variety of fish species that you might encounter. It doesn't require a whole lot of fancy equipment. A great way to get your kids out. Great introductory activity, and licensing is basically minimal. And so we'll talk about regulations toward the end. So piers can come in a lot of variety of shapes. So you got some piers that have fingers that go off to the side. You got some just one long plank gangway. You got others that maybe they have a large bulbous end. Where you want to stand and where you want to try is dependent upon what species you want to target. My dog's having an episode in the background. So if you want to target like perch species, you could be standing up here in the surf line. And then also if there's a lot of structure on your pier, there's other perch species that associate with that structure. Mid-water, in the mid area here, you might find game fish like halibut, sharks, and rays. You don't necessarily have to go to the very end, to the deepest part. If you come out to the end here, you might encounter pelagic or mid-water swimming species such as mackerels, various bait fishes. If you live in Southern California, the chance for exotics. Now, jetties, on the other hand, typically are continuous, roughly the same habitat. Notice for this one, for example, it's all rocky, except for where the jetty meets land, where it usually is sand. The rest of it, rocky being all the way to the end, it's going to have variety of depth. So you could try different spots. Usually what you're going to find in these areas are species that like structures such as rockfish and those sorts of animals. Gear for fishing off a pier jetty, pretty simple. If you want to target bait fish type species, sardines, mackerel, you can fish what's called a sabiki rig. They're usually a small feathered rig, usually with a little attraction bead here. These typically glow. Spinning reel, rod, very common setup. In terms of rigging, this is an example of one way to rig. If you caught a piece of bait with your sabiki rig, you can turn around and fish it off with your floating setup. Or you can fish it off the bottom, with the lead weight in the bottom and your hook up above. It's called a drop shot. And of course, you can always crab off of piers, and we're going to talk about crabbing in a little bit as well. So what can you catch? Wide variety of species depending on where you are, and if you're fishing off a pier or a jetty. So you got various perch species, rockfish, of course. Here's a picture of an angler with a bonito. If you're in Southern California, possible. They're starting to have some actually show up here heading further north. But every day is a little bit different. And I said, every position on the pier, you got a chance of something different as well. Variety of other things you might run into. Of course, halibut's an option. There's mackerel there, bat rays, other sharks. You can crab off of piers and jetties. So here's an angler using a surf rod with what's called a crab snare, which I will cover in a little bit. You can also use a hoop net off a pier or a jetty to target things like crabs. In this case, this angler used his hoop net to help land his fish. Now, one other piece of gear, which is a good thing to have, is some sort of a measuring device, because if you do encounter a species such as halibut that have a minimum length, you want to be able to verify that you've met that standard. So in terms of regulations for a pier or jetty, pretty simple, no license required, but you should check to make sure if there are any report cards required for that particular species you're going to target, or if you're in an area that requires a special validation. There are gear limits, no more than 2 lines per angler, but that could be 2 rod and reels, that could be 2 crab hoop nets, so you got the lines that go off of from you to your hoop net. It could be a crab snare off of 1 rod and a fishing rod with a hook and sinker on the other. Any combination, but no more than 2. If you're fishing in an area that has special gear restrictions, those supersede those 2 lines. So for example, in San Francisco Bay, where it's 1 line, and also pay attention to your species. So rockfish, for example, is a 1 line per angler species and method of take. So you could still be on a jetty, but you're fishing with 1 rod. And then, of course, species, bag, and possession limits always apply. So a few suggestions to help make your trip more enjoyable. Of course, we want to give space to our fellow anglers. You know, we go out there to have a good time. When I go out fishing, either from shore or from a boat, I always like to get out by myself, find my own fish. You know, same thing on a pier or jetty, find your own piece of real estate and then do your thing. If you're fishing off a pier, learn how to cast underhanded. A lot of piers actually prohibit overhead casting because of safety issues, snagging somebody behind you, car window damage from sinkers and that kind of thing. Find yourself a collapsible wagon or even a small garden cart. If you look up, do a search for images on like pier carts or jetty carts, you'll see a wide variety of options of creative anglers who have built their own. Using larger tires is helpful because it helps get over the bumps and the various boards and obstacles getting to your fishing spot. But you can help carry all your stuff out there in one trip, your cooler, your tackle box, rod, reels, whatever you're going to need for your day. And ultimately, you're going out to a pier, a jetty, to have a good time outside. So, go into it with that sort of a mindset. I'm there to have fun. If I get anything, that's a bonus. So the other thing I like about this time of year, as I said, it's coming up on crab season. Dungeness crab season starts in November. Of course, Dungeness crab can be targeted, and rock crab, which is another crab species, can be targeted off piers and jetties, vessels, or other floating devices such as a kayak, for example. So for this portion of my talk, we're going to talk crab ID, ways you can catch crab. There are some new trap regulations that are pending, accessories, etiquette, and of course, at the very end, we'll go over some additional resources. So off our coast, you may encounter one of 4 species of crab. Of course, there's the Dungeness crab, commonly found in grocery stores, restaurants. And then there's 3 species of rock crab. You have your red rock crab, brown, and yellow. In terms of regulations and management, these 3 are all basically considered the rock crab category. Red rock crab be most common off of piers and jetties, and then brown and yellow rock crab you're going to find further offshore, for example, over hard bottom, especially shallow with some kelp as an option. Dungeness prefer sandy habitat, and depending on the part of the state where I live, Dungeness are found in deeper water, so you have to have a boat. But in Northern California, say San Francisco North, you can catch Dungeness crab from the shore, from a beach. You can catch them from piers and as well as jetties. So males and females, and this goes for any crab, Male crabs they have the flap on the bottom is very skinny. A female crab will have a wider flap, and then during the breeding season, that flap might be full of eggs. Typically, female bodies are also a little smaller. Generally, females, I typically release them myself because they usually don't make the minimum size requirement, but like I said, they typically are a little bit smaller claws, smaller legs, and I'll go ahead and send them back. So what do you need to go crabbing? Of course, you need something to capture crab. You need your measuring device. If you're fishing from a boat or from a kayak or some other floating device, something to hold your catch. There's bait, other accessories, some optional, some not. Of course, you got to have your good attitude and outlook. And then when you're all done, your pot of boiling water to cook your catch. So what can you use to catch crab? Of course, you can use your hand. You can take crustaceans by the hand. You can use a crab snare. There's hoop nets. And then, of course, there are traps. So I'll cover each one. Now, crab snares. Here's an example of a crab snare. Basically, it's a bait box. Sometimes these come with little weights on them. These are meant to be attached to the end of a fishing rod. I would suggest a stouter rod, for example, like a surf rod with 30 to 40 pound test minimum, because when you put the bait in here, you're casting this, you'd hate to have it break off and then go flying. Or if you got a crab on the other end, such as this picture, you might have a significant amount of weight. You have up to 6 loops. You could have up to 6 crab on here, or maybe more. So the way this works, it sits on the bottom. The crab walks along. He's standing in a loop. He's pecking at the cage. A lot of times you can feel the crab trying to drag the box away. If you keep enough tension from your swivel to your main line, you'll be able to see that action, slowly reel in, and then your crab is now caught. Hoop nets is another option for those fishing off of piers. Very common pier device. Also serves as a landing net for a larger fish. There's also the conical style hoop net, which is this one here. These can be fished off of piers and jetties, or you can fish them off a boat. The way that you fish these, you put your bait. I would attach my bait here in the bottom ring. And then when you lift up, that bottom ring will sink down, be lower than your main rings. And then so your crab will be stuck here in the middle as you lift the net to the surface. If you are fishing a hoop net south of Point Arguello off from a boat, you have the same marking requirements as a crab trap. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Crab traps come in a variety of shapes, sizes, configurations. Here's 3 examples I found in my local tackle store. There's a lot of custom traps out on the market, traps you can order, ready to go. So these 2 here are examples of traps that are collapsible, meant to be compressed down for storage. And then you have the fixed type of trap here made out of rebar and then stainless steel wire. This is a smaller sport size version of what's used commercially. All crab traps must have 2 escape rings right here. And then there's one there, and then you see the other one on the other side. So, and then let's talk setup. So you have your trap. How do I put this together? So the first thing is, of course, use a crab float. No detergent bottles, no bleach bottles. Don't go through extra loads of wash because you need to have a float for your trap. Get a crab float. Crab floats are made out of basically kind of bullet shape like this picture here. Styrofoam, there's a hole in the center so you can run your line through it. And then I usually tie it off with a knot at each end. Your recreational crab trap, you want to find yourself a small red float, 3x5. And we'll talk about why in a little bit here. Now, you want to mark your main float, which is this one, with the operator's Go ID number. The Go ID number or Get Outdoors identification number which is how you can track your purchases, preference points, harvest reporting. When you buy a hunting license or a fishing license, you get a Go ID number. So that Go ID number must be on that float. So you want to please avoid using floating line. Floating line like the Poly Pro, the yellow stuff, or trucker's line, it's less expensive, but because it floats, it can pose a hazard to navigation. You know, other boats coming through the area. If you got a floating line out there, that's also a hazard for whale entanglement. Better would be a neutrally or a sinking kind of line to where you don't have line on the surface. The other option, and some anglers will do, they'll weave in lead weights, you know, mid-water in a couple places, so that way the line hangs straight down. And there are clips that you can buy that have sinkers attached to them. The best is to have one continuous piece of line that's sinking or neutrally buoyant that doesn't have anything hanging off of it, less chance of snagging. And you do want to weigh your pots appropriately. Crab traps will walk, so you sink one out, but then the swell and current, they'll actually start to move on the C4. Where I crab, my traps weigh around 20 to 25 pounds a piece. If you're crabbing shallow, let's say in the San Francisco area, your trap might weigh 5 to 10 pounds. You know, so it kind of depends on, you know, what you're crabbing, where you are, and, you know, what you're crabbing off of. If you're doing off a pier or jetty, you might not need any weight because your gear is right there in front of you. You want to make sure you have enough scope, but not too much. Scope is the extra line above and beyond what's needed for your depth of water. You do want to strive for like a 20 to 25% extra line above the water depth. So if I'm fishing in 100 feet of water, I don't want to have just 100 feet of line between the trap and the buoy. You want to have, you know, 120, 130 feet of line, because that will take into account the change in the tide, swell, but also current. If you don't have enough line, what'll happen is you throw it out there, you come back to pick up your trap, and now your buoy's underwater and you won't be able to get it. If you use a trap, it must have a destruct device. Destruct devices allow traps that are lost to not continue to fish, called ghost fishing. So there's a couple of different things you can do here. In this case, this trap, this is an example of the fixed ring with a single piece of 120 cotton, that when this cotton cuts, this ring will fall out, creating the required opening. You can also use a single strand of 120 cotton to a piece of rubber strap here. Notice that it's a single loop. It's not doubled over. So you have to think of it, if any part of that string cuts, will it open up? If you double up here and that's the piece that cuts, it may not open up correctly. So the way it works here, so you have your trap, this is the trap door, the strap comes across, you put your hook in there, so this holds the lid down. So if your trap were lost, if it cut here or the strap cut, then the crab can push their way out and then escape. So there are some new trap regulations pending for 2021. As of today, the pending regulations are, so the main buoy must be at least 5 by 11 inches. Notice I said at least, that's the minimum. Okay, got to have a red trailer float. So it's a 3 by 5, maximum of 3 feet between floats. This is my trap here. I have this set up to about 1.5 feet between my main float and the red float. I have my Go ID, but something that's not required, but I do as a little extra for identification purposes, I put my phone number on there. So if my trap were lost, somebody snagged it, they could say, hey, I found your trap. Call me up, I can get my gear back. There'll be a $2.25 crab trap validation. This is for anybody who takes crabs with a crab trap. Okay, and that'll actually be available through the online license service here soon. And then a limit of 10 traps per operator and with no deployment 7 days prior to opening day of Dungeness. So you can't be rock crab fishing with a trap 7 days prior to the opening day of Dungeness crab. So there are some accessories would be a good thing to have. Of course, there's the crab puller for those who are fishing from boats. Pullers make things nice. When I first started crabbing, I crabbed and pulled by hand. It is possible. It's just very hard work, but it is possible to pull from deep water. The puller does make things a lot better. There is a variety of pullers on the market. These little guys here, this is a bait pin. So you would use this to either, you could poke it through your bait and then fix it to the inside of your trap so it hangs, or you can use this to attach your bait to the bottom of your hoop net. You can also use wire or zip ties. Like I said, this is nice and convenient. You must have a measuring device. So on our boat, we got 3 of them. That way I can't turn around and go, where's the gauge at? There's one by the puller, and we'll have one on the starboard and the port side, or right and left. We don't speak nautical. That way I got one I can turn around, there's a gauge. A word of caution on crab gauges. I would suggest taking a reputable tape measure and verifying that the distance between the two is what it says it is. I have 3 gauges here. 2 were exact as required. 1 was off. I had to take a file, open it up a little bit. And of course, there's the 120 cotton. That one I have on the boat, so I need to repair destructive ice, that sort of thing. Bait containers, you can put bait in their mesh bags. There's mesh or wire cages. There's the bait cups, or you can just put your bait carcass, fish carcass, right on in your trap. A word about bait. I like using fresher is better. Crab are scavengers, but if it came down to a fresh piece of bait versus one that was freezer burned for 6 months in your freezer, you will definitely catch more with fresh. So you can use fish carcasses from previous trips. Just make sure nothing from a prohibited species or undersized. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your bait. Squid and sardines, very common, fairly easy to get. You can buy sardines and squid usually in bulk. I used to crab with a guy who we used chicken and turkeys. Prior to Thanksgiving, turkey might be $60 to $1 a pound. After Thanksgiving, they're 25 cents. He would buy a bunch of turkeys. So I'd have one turkey, I'd have to carve it all up and then pin those turkey pieces in the traps. They actually held up a lot better. So you had a longer period of time where the crab would have something to feed on, and it readily available. Some other accessories you might want to have, of course, a pair of gloves, rain gear. Those are also good things to have with you. So you've caught some crab, be it from a pier, jetty, boat, kayak, some other floating device. Can you keep it? So when it comes to crabs, they do have to have they got a minimum they got to have. So 5 3/4 for Dungeness, or rock crab is 4 inches. The total bag in possession limit, Dungeness crab is 10, rock crab is 35. Now, Dungeness opening day and season depends on the county that you fish in. Rock crab is year round, and there's no prohibition on the take of females. If you want to keep a female crab, as long as she measures, you're more than welcome to keep her. Like I said, it's a personal choice. Now, the way you measure your crab, as shown in the picture, you want to go the widest part of the shell, but not the points. So you're measuring from the base of the point to the widest part of the shell at the base of the other point. So in this case, this particular crab is right around 6 inches. So for crabbing, like anything else, there's always a few rules and etiquette things you can go by to help make your time out more enjoyable. Avoid setting gear in vessel traffic areas. Of course, if you see derelict gear or hazards navigation, by all means, report the position to the appropriate authorities. Find your own space. Don't set on other traps, or don't go stand right next to the guy on the pier, because he's catching crab in his hoop net. Don't stand right on top of him. Go down a little bit. I like to always try to find my own fish. I find my own crab, find the habitat that they like and get my gear out there. And hopefully, if everybody finds their own spot, then everybody's traps can fish equally well. Because imagine each trap or each hoop net is attracting crab in that area. Plus, when you fish too close together to somebody else, there's also the chance of tangling and a bunch of other messes. And so avoid that by just going on your own. If it's not your pot, please don't touch it. There are exceptions, such as having written permission from the operator to pull somebody else's gear. If you have a buddy that he laid out his gear, he won't be able to go pick it. He can give you written permission, including the go ID number, name, all that sort of stuff. And then that would allow you to go ahead and pull it on your boat. And if there's whales in the area, of course, and you're going to go lay out, it's best just not to set, let the whales do their thing, come back another day or go somewhere else. So there's some resources available on the department's webpage to help you have a much more enjoyable day. This is our first thing is our interactive ocean sport fish map. This is actually something that I use when rock fishing, because you can put in the various boundaries, the marine protected areas, the rockfish depth limits. You can have all that sort of stuff in this application. It does require a wireless signal. It does work in most areas, might be a little slow, but it still works in most parts of the state. There's links to local regs, but also detailed regulations. And of course, if you have a question, it could be anything marine related, but you don't know who to talk to, send an email to our askmarine@wildlife.ca.gov web or email address. The staff that monitor that email will then forward your email and information to the appropriate staff member, and then they'll go ahead and get back to you. There's the sport fish regulations. Regulations are not printed anymore, so by all means, please see this link. There's our fishing passport. This is actually a very good one here. This resource here, you can find all sorts of information about fishing. There's videos, tutorials. In fact, here's a couple of crab videos that I did previously. How to fish from a pier, use salt water, also links to regulations. So this is a very good resource. There's our marine page on crabs. This is everything to do with crab, from regulations, environmental documents, lots of other info there. And then finally, this is our marine species page. The marine species page, if you want to learn about selected marine finfish, invertebrates, plants, this is the place to go. Includes information on the fishery, life history, and what the current status are. So this is your go-to. So this concludes my presentation on piers, jetties, and getting started in crab fishing. And I guess we'll just open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, and we got a lot of them coming in, Travis. So this is great that we are wrapping up and getting right to it. I'm going to start with, you talked about 1 line or 2 line. Now, do you need a license for each rod and line, or does it vary place to place?
If you're fishing, and this is the important part, if you're fishing from a pier or jetty or breakwater, because pier, jetties, and breakwaters are considered piers when it comes to, as far as the definition, fishing and licensing, you do not need a sport fishing license. So under 16, no license required anywhere. 16 and up, typically you do. If you're
no matter
fishing,
how many lines and rods you have in. Okay.
Regardless. So you're allowed up to those 2 lines per angler. Now, keep in mind that anglers should be able to handle their own gear. You don't want to take out your 1-year-old toddler and then put out 2 rods for the toddler. Well, that's my boy's rods. I'm like, yeah, that probably isn't going to work. But say if you're taking your kids out and they can all handle their own gear, even if it requires a little bit of help on your part, they can have 2 rods apiece, or a hoop net and a rod, or whatever the case is, just no more than 2.
Okay. Now you mentioned casting from a jetty or pier. You want to learn how to do underhand. Where would you
from jetties cast overhand? Piers, you want to do kind of it's an underhand cast.
Okay. Where do you recommend people learn that? This person said I can barely cast overhand, like YouTube videos or what?
Yeah, basically the best way to describe it is, so if I'm standing at the end of the pier at the edge, the water's on the other side of the railing, I let my rod let the rod tip hang down. And so I'm using, let's say, a spinning rod. I got my finger on the rod and the line. Rock it back toward you, and then as you're sweeping forward, you're letting your finger go, and then the line should come out away from you. YouTube videos are the best. Though what happens a lot of times, if you don't let go, then your offering is going to end up behind you.
Yeah.
They don't do overhand casting because you imagine if you're walking behind doing that, you got a hook in the eye, hook in your ear, or what if your car was parked right behind somebody? Windshield is not a good thing.
Yeah, but maybe go to YouTube for some real better. That was a great visual that you did, but
yeah, you'll see other people doing it, and it's one of those learn as you go.
Yeah, or make a friend with one of your neighbors that's out there next to you and ask them to kind of walk you through it.
Yeah, say like, hey, how do you do that?
Yeah. All right, you mentioned crabbing with your hands. Do you wear gloves with that? Don't they pinch?
Okay, so you can take crustaceans by the hand. Crabs, if you go from let's back this up a step here. Now,
yeah, that's great. Show us a visual.
There's a couple ways to, when you're holding crab from the base, there's no way for the claws to get you.
Ah, got it.
Now, if I'm trying to catch them by the hand, you're going to want to go from the back end. It is legal to take crab by the hand. Not overly effective, but it is legal. Now, the other option is in this picture with the measurements. If you hold them by the hind legs, there's no way for the claws to get you. They can't rotate their pinchers all the way around. They'll try.
Jointed. Yeah.
They'll try. They'll get right about where their eye stalks are, but that's it. So you hold them from the rear. The last 2 legs is actually a very good handle.
Okay. This person, I was a little confused with the snare trap. Do you use a rod to cast those out? What weight line is good for that? Seems heavy.
Okay, so these are meant to be cast from a rod of some sort. I would suggest a heavier rod. I like at least 30-pound test. That way I know it's going to get back. These typically sometimes will come with sinkers attached to them, so you can really get it out there. Like this one here, if you pack it with bait, you'd be able to cast it quite a ways. But more importantly, if you got crab on here, let's say you're Dungeness crab fishing up in the Bay Area from the beach. Dungeness crab could be 1 to 2 pounds a piece. So you're dragging that crab back with this. Yeah, you want to have a little heavier line test. So this is not finesse kind of fishing. You're cast it out, take the slack out of your line. So it's a straight shot from the line, to straight pull from here up to your line. And then, should the crab get caught already, then, you'll feel them walking away from you. Or when you reel up, you can catch one in one of the snares that way too.
Okay. So you said you like to use about a 30 pound?
30 pound.
Okay. All right, best sinking kind of line.
There's a variety of crab line that are on the market. Usually these lines will have a little strand of lead woven in. You can also get the neutrally buoyant lines to where they don't float, they just gradually sink. So those are two options. Usually you can find them, a lot of larger tackle stores. So don't walk into Big Five or, a smaller sort of a tackle store to find crab gear, but go to a fishing supply store.
Okay. This person said they're making a shopping list from your presentation. So that's good to know exactly what kind of stores.
There are some manufacturers that'll actually make this sort of a setup, but they'll have a sinker on the end. So then you just clip it right on your line. I typically don't like using those because this is an extra thing that can snag stuff. And also when we use a puller on my boat. You can't run this through your puller. So you have to remember to take it off. Otherwise you end up losing it.
Now you mentioned, so you do this from a boat. Have you fished from a kayak? We had so many people asking about crabbing and fishing from kayaks.
Now I have not fished from a kayak. I have actually an inflatable pontoon. It's one of the, see a lot of trout guys with them. You got the two pontoons and then you sit in the middle. Where I crab, I wouldn't be able to get out there because like I said, I'm crabbing in like 300 feet of water. Now, if you're crabbing from, let's say, your kayak, you can certainly use a hoop net. You can use a trap, depending on the capacity with a buoy lines, your standard setup, because you're only pulling, you might be pulling from 40 feet, 60 feet of water. Here, where we fish for Dungeness in Monterey Bay, it's way out of the range for a kayak. But you might find rock crab in close. Rock crab typically are in shallow water.
So where would be, what species and where would be the best place for people that are interested in crabbing from a kayak?
So let's say if you're doing a kayak, you can of course fish closer to shore over hard bottom for rock crab species, hence the name rock crab.
What a concept.
Think hard bottom, or also, kelp type habitat. Because kelp will attach to hard bottom or rocky outcrops and whatnot. So those are places that you can lay out your gear, go fish, do your thing, come back and pull it. Or if you're interested in Dungeness crab from a kayak, you'd have to go up to like the Bay Area and further north. When I say the Bay Area, think like Half Moon Bay and so on. Dungeness, for whatever reason, occur in shallow waters the further north you go.
Okay.
And when I say shallow, we're talking less than 100 feet.
Okay. So hopefully that helps those of you that were super excited about crabbing from a kayak.
You can crab, you can crab, like, for example, where I live in Monterey Bay, but you're going to be targeting like rock crab.
Okay. And those are smaller than Dungeness, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right. So when is opening day of Dungeness season? Did you say it varies county by county?
By the county, but there's also some other rules potentially in play that are still part of the pending package of those.
Okay, this was kind of a two-part with that. So when would those proposed new regulations go into effect?
So the way regulations work is there's a process, and the end of the process is that there's a double check by what's called the Office of Administrative Law. Basically, a bunch of lawyers look at it and go, is this rule or regulation legal? And then they give their approval, and typically then it goes to the Secretary of State. And once it goes to the Secretary of State, then that rule is now live. It's still in the Office of Administrative Law process. They have not given their final ruling. Most likely they're expected to do so soon, hopefully. I mean, there's still another 6 weeks or so before Dungeness typically opens for most counties, which would be the first weekend of November.
Yeah.
Like I said, it depends on the county. You'd have to consult the regulation books, because if county XYZ, here's the start and end dates, county, ABC, different
But
dates.
maybe beach, I'm going to send everyone an email after this huddle with some, like pretty much all of the resources that Travis talked about, and then some extra resources that I'll just throw together. Would you say like maybe start looking out for those around November 1st then? Like if people are planning to go crabbing?
Then, I mean, that's,
Okay.
and that's where the one link that goes to everything crab, that's where one of the places that you can look.
Okay.
The other option, if you want to see the whole regulation package, you can find that on the Fish and Game Commission's webpage too.
Yes. And I did throw a link for that in the chat, but it's kind of way up there now, but I will definitely include it in the follow-up email. Okay. So this was another, I think people are really wanting to make sure they're following any new regs before they go out. This one had to do with, you had a slide about it and it said, is 6 days okay then with the new regs? I don't know if you want to go to that slide and maybe we can figure it out.
Okay, so no deployment 7 days prior to opening day. So 6 days is not 7 days.
So it'd have to be 7 or 8
calendar days prior to opening day of Dungeness Crab. So it's going to depend on the county that you're crabbing in. Count 7 days before that. You know, that's when your limit of when you can have traps in the water for, let's say, rock crab, because Dungeness is not open. And then there's the 7 day period where you can't have any traps in the water. And it says traps. And then Dungeness Crab, the opening day is that first Saturday, midnight, is when you can legally lay out.
Okay, so 6 days is not okay then?
Nope, 6 days is not 7 days.
Okay. All right, what's the best type of knot to use when tying lines to traps? Is there a certain one?
Well, in fact, we got my picture up here. So here's what I did with this particular trap here. There's actually a couple of different knots that commercial fishermen will tie as a kind of a stopper knot for their buoy. This typically is basically like a double overhand knot. And then for my bridle, I actually braided this, on one side, used a shackle to attach to that side of the trap. I have the same thing over here. And then I essentially have a bridle that I made, wove a loop, essentially. You can tie, it's called a bowline. That's another option. I always like to secure my knots, so if you go ahead and tie a loop, I secure the end of it with, like, for example, a zip tie, and then I'll wrap it with tape too, to make sure it doesn't come undone. But more importantly, I just don't like stuff that can snag anything, lines on lines or pieces of kelp, so I like to have everything nice and smooth.
And you kind of said this before, but this also seems kind of like trial and error. Just get out there and do it. And if something doesn't work for you, try something else, like the zip ties.
Like this particular trap here, there's several different brands of this particular style of trap, which is a collapsible. I use what I have for weights. Like this is old pieces of rebar.
Oh, okay.
But this trap here, I've also made it more rigid by adding these aluminum clips to where this is no longer collapsible, but it's much more sturdy. It's not held together with, masking tape and zip ties anymore.
Right.
And so there's this sort of thing here. I got to this sort of a design after trial and error of, season after season, what works, what doesn't work. So then I just apply it to the next build. Yeah.
Okay. Someone was asking if you could go a little bit more into detail on what type of bait you use for crabbing. And I know we've been practicing this webinar, and I was really excited about some not fish bait that you use sometimes.
So in terms of for bait, now what I use for bait, I use squid. There's the bait cups, which was in the previous slide, or the large cages. Squid, sardines. Fortunately, I have the ability to store stuff in a couple of different freezers. So I have rockfish that are caught from within season. Like I said, the main thing when you have a bait, make sure it's not a prohibited species or something that is, doesn't meet the minimum size requirement. There are some There are some federal rules regarding the use of fish and wildlife. For example, like I can use the carcass from a duck taken during duck season if I'm crabbing during that same time. So if I shoot my limit of DURDs opening weekend in October, I can use those carcasses in November because it's still duck season, but I cannot use them in February. I asked the wardens about that. It was kind of a complex answer. The easiest was go back to squid and sardines.
Were you successful with?
The other option is using pieces of chicken.
Yeah.
Chicken works really well, pieces of turkey. And that's where like these clips actually come in very handy. You can take your chicken thigh piece, poke it through, and then let it hang off of there. It's a very sturdy bait. It's got just enough oil in it to give off a nice little scent trail. The nice thing with a chicken type of bait or turkey is that the small, people call them fleas, but they're called isopods. They don't chew up your bait as fast, so it'll actually last a lot longer.
So there you go. Crab,
and you can buy chicken
eating chicken.
You can get chicken anywhere. And, and quite frankly, bait gets really expensive after January when a lot of the fishing seasons are typically closed. So bait ends up becoming more expensive than buying chicken. You can get chicken for cheaper than what I've seen, like rockfish carcasses, for example.
Very good tip. Okay, when crabbing, I heard you need 1 gauge per angler. Can this be confirmed?
The main thing is that the regs do state that everyone that's fishing have a measuring device, but you're all fishing from your boat. My partner and I, there's 2 of us, but I got 3 gauges. Mostly because.
How much does a gauge run typically?
$2 to $5.
Okay. So maybe yeah.
There's no reason why you couldn't have 1 per person just to be on the safe side. I mean, if you're crabbing with you and your 2 buddies, you'd have 1 here, 1 there. My thing is, I don't want to turn around and go, "Where's the gauge?"
Right.
Because I have 1
easily, yeah.
1 on the puller, 1 in each compartment, either side of me, so I can just turn around and go, grab my gauge, boom, over the side. Nope, that one goes in the tank.
Okay. So how, this one might take a little bit of time, but how, our huddlers are just getting started. How do you pick a spot where you want to go fishing or crabbing? And like, is there a certain habitat that you're looking for? Like what was the best place for people to go?
So if I'm fishing from a pier or from the jetty, a jetty, the habitat is pretty much the same from one end to the other, and it just varies in depth. You could pick a spot to say, "Hey, I like this right where I'm standing. This looks good here. Let's try here." You can walk, cast, walk, cast, walk. Fishing from a pier, it depends on what species you want to target. So, and my first slide where I said, if you're like the first third, you're looking for perch, you could be in the middle for halibut or sharks and rays. Toward the end, to be casting for, pelagic or mid-water swimming. When it comes to crab fishing from a vessel or floating device, it would help if you knew where you were. So you'd have to have a GPS or a plotter or something, or at least a nautical chart or a map, so that you can go, okay, right here is sand, and here's where I am. Dungeness crab prefer sandy bottom. Rock crab prefer, hard bottom, hence the name rock crab.
Mm-hmm.
You will find rock crab in shallow sandy water as well. Not very many, but they're there. And if you fish out over mud, if you put your trap, it ends up being mud, most likely you're going to catch an animal called a hagfish, and you don't want that. Your trap will come up covered in fish slime, and your bait will be gone, and you'll have nothing to show for it. So sand preferably for Dungeness, hard bottom for rock crab species. And keep in mind, if you're fishing for rock crab over rocks, you do run the risk of snagging your gear. So that is what you take.
All right. Well, that put us right right at the end of our presentation. If anyone else has any more questions, again, I'm going to be sending an email to all of you after this huddle, and it'll have that Ask Marine email address in there, so you can reply back to that and ask anything that you might have thought of after our presentation, or you can email me at the R3 statewide program at wildlife.ca.gov, and that's where the email will come from. So you can just reply right back to me if you have any more questions that we didn't get to. Also, we're going to have more R3H3s coming up. We actually have 3 for the month of October. Our first one is going to be a conversation on duck calls and decoys on October 1st. Then on October 15th, we're going to help you navigate your first trip to the archery store. And on October 29th, an introduction to teaching kids how to fish, which should be exciting right before Halloween. So those registration links are up already on our R3 calendar, which is on the R3 webpage. Also, a big thank you to Travis. Thank you for being here again with us, Travis. I always love when you are willing to come on and participate. And a big thank you to you, all of our huddlers, for taking those extra steps to educate yourselves on being the best hunters, anglers, foragers, and shooting sports enthusiasts you can be. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and hopefully soon we'll have some fall-like weather. But happy fall. Have a great weekend. Thanks for tuning in.